Part 1. The Calm Before the Storm. In the world of politics, where every move is scrutinized and every word carries weight, Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to attention. Known for her fiery speeches and unapologetic style, she had become a household name over the years. People either loved her boldness or hated her confrontational approach, but one thing was certain: she never went unnoticed. Her rise in Washington wasn't just about charisma. It was also fueled by her ability to connect with people on issues that mattered most to them. Whether it was advocating for marginalized communities or challenging corporate greed, Jasmine had built a reputation as someone who spoke truth to power. But fame comes at a price. The more visible you are, the more targets appear on your back. And for Jasmine, there was no shortage of critics waiting for their chance to take her down. Among those critics stood Kash Patel, a former government official turned media personality. Kash wasn't your typical talking head. He prided himself on digging deep into stories others might overlook. With a knack for investigative journalism and an unwavering determination to expose what he believed were injustices, Kash quickly gained traction among viewers who craved transparency in politics. Their paths had crossed before, mostly online, where heated exchanges between the two weren't uncommon. Both had strong personalities and neither backed down easily when challenged. These digital spats often ended with snarky remarks flying back and forth, leaving fans entertained but not much wiser about the real issues at hand. At the time, these arguments seemed harmless enough. A bit of political theater played out for likes and shares. But little did anyone know, something far bigger was brewing beneath the surface. Rumors started swirling around Capitol Hill. Whispers echoed through hallways and leaked onto social media threads. Kash Patel, according to insiders, had stumbled upon something explosive. Something that could potentially shake Jasmine Crockett's entire career to its core. Details were scarce, but the buzz was undeniable. Was this just another baseless rumor? Or was Kash sitting on evidence so damning that it could change everything? For days, speculation ran wild. Supporters of Jasmine dismissed the chatter as fake news designed to discredit her work. Critics, however, leaned in closer, eager to see if Kash would deliver on whatever bombshell he claimed to have uncovered. Meanwhile, Kash remained tight-lipped, teasing only cryptic hints during interviews. "Stay tuned," he'd say with a knowing smile, his tone dripping with anticipation. It was clear he was saving the big reveal for maximum impact. As the tension mounted, everyone braced themselves for what was coming next. No one knew exactly when or how Kash planned to drop his alleged bombshell, but they knew it wouldn't be subtle. What happened next would unfold live on national television, turning a routine morning show into a spectacle watched by millions. For Jasmine Crockett, life as she knew it was about to change forever. And for Kash Patel, this was his moment to shine, or stumble spectacularly. The calm before the storm felt almost eerie. On one side, Jasmine continued her usual schedule, attending meetings, giving speeches, and engaging with constituents. She appeared unfazed by the growing murmurs, projecting confidence even as questions lingered in the air. Behind closed doors, though, friends close to her admitted she was restless. Late-night phone calls and hushed conversations hinted at anxiety bubbling under the surface. Could she weather whatever storm was headed her way? Or was this the beginning of the end? On the other side, Kash Patel worked tirelessly, poring over documents and preparing his case. His team operated like a well-oiled machine, ensuring every detail was meticulously checked and double-checked. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be ignored. As the clock ticked closer to the day of reckoning, the stakes grew higher. Lives, careers, and reputations hung in the balance. And then finally, the moment arrived. Cameras rolled, lights flashed, and millions tuned in to watch what promised to be a groundbreaking segment. Kash Patel sat confidently across from the host, his demeanor calm but focused. Little did anyone know, within minutes, the nation would witness a revelation that would send shockwaves through the political landscape and leave Jasmine Crockett reeling in its aftermath. This was more than just a clash of egos or ideologies. It was a battle for credibility, integrity, and survival. And as the story unfolded, it became clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The clock struck 8 a.m., and the live broadcast began. Millions of viewers tuned in, expecting the usual mix of political commentary and breaking news. But this morning was different. Kash Patel sat across from the host, his expression calm yet intense. He leaned slightly forward as if he were about to share something monumental. The energy in the room felt electric, even through the screen. "Let's get straight to it," Kash said, his voice steady but firm. "Today we're going to talk about something that needs to be addressed, something that affects trust, accountability, and the very foundation of our political system." Viewers perked up. This wasn't the typical vague introduction. They could sense this was big. He started laying out his case step by step. First, he explained how his team had been investigating financial records tied to certain political figures. It wasn't just idle curiosity. It was part of a broader effort to ensure transparency in government. Then, without hesitation, he dropped the name that everyone had been waiting for: Jasmine Crockett. Kash didn't mince words. He claimed that documents showed irregularities in her campaign finances. Money meant for grassroots initiatives and community programs had allegedly been redirected into personal accounts. At first, viewers weren't sure what to make of it. These kinds of accusations were nothing new in politics after all. But Kash wasn't done yet. He pulled up screenshots of emails on the screen. Each one seemed to tell a story. Some appeared to show approvals for transfers, while others hinted at discussions about covering tracks. Kash pointed out specific details: the dates, the amounts, and even the names of individuals involved. "These aren't random accusations," he emphasized. "This is evidence. Hard proof." As the segment unfolded, social media erupted. Hashtags like Todd Crockett Exposed and Kash Drops the Truth started trending within minutes. People couldn't believe what they were seeing or hearing. Supporters of Kash praised him for shining a light on corruption, while critics accused him of cherry-picking information to paint a biased picture. Either way, the conversation was everywhere. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, was watching from home. At first, she tried to brush it off. She told herself it was just another smear campaign, the kind she'd faced before. But as Kash continued presenting document after document, a knot formed in her stomach. This wasn't just speculation or hearsay. It was detailed, concrete, and impossible to ignore. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, colleagues, and reporters asking for comments. Her team scrambled to respond, but the pressure mounted quickly. For the first time in her career, Jasmine felt cornered. She knew she needed to address this head-on, but how? Every word she said would be analyzed, dissected, and potentially used against her. By the time Kash wrapped up his segment, the damage was already done. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Shocking Revelations Shake Washington" and "Documents Raise Questions About Campaign Funds." Commentators debated whether the allegations were legitimate or politically motivated. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens weighed in, sharing memes, opinions, and conspiracy theories online. For Kash, this was more than just a win. It was validation. He had spent months digging into these records, following leads, and connecting dots that others had overlooked. Now his hard work was paying off. Critics might accuse him of grandstanding, but he saw himself as a watchdog, someone willing to hold powerful people accountable when no one else would. But for Jasmine, the fallout was devastating. Friends who once stood by her side now hesitated to speak publicly in her defense. Allies quietly distanced themselves, worried about being associated with controversy. Even some of her most loyal supporters began questioning whether they'd backed the right person. As the day wore on, Jasmine realized she couldn't stay silent any longer. She needed to fight back, but how? Denying everything outright wouldn't work. The documents Kash presented seemed too convincing. Acknowledging them, even partially, risked confirming suspicions. She found herself stuck between a rock and a hard place, unsure of which move to make next. That evening, as the sun set and the noise of the day began to fade, Jasmine sat alone in her living room. Her mind raced with thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. Would this scandal define her legacy? Or could she somehow turn things around and reclaim control of the narrative? Little did she know, her response would only add fuel to the fire. What happened next would shock the nation and cement this moment as one of the most unforgettable chapters in modern political history. The next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Jasmine Crockett knew she couldn't afford to stay silent any longer. Every hour that passed without a response gave her critics more ammunition. Social media was ablaze with accusations, memes mocking her predicament and calls for accountability. Her name was everywhere, and not in a good way. The pressure mounted until it became unbearable. She had to act, and fast. Her team scrambled to put together a plan. They booked her on another major news network for an emergency appearance. This wasn't just about damage control, it was about survival. As she prepared for the interview, her advisors urged her to stay calm, stick to the facts, and avoid emotional outbursts. Stay composed, they told her. Don't let them see you crack. But inside, Jasmine was anything but composed. Her mind raced with anger, frustration, and fear. How could this have happened? Who had leaked those documents? And why now, when the cameras rolled? Jasmine walked onto the set with her head held high. At first glance, she seemed confident, the same strong, unshakable figure people had come to know. But as soon as she sat down and the host introduced the topic, cracks began to show. Her voice trembled slightly as she launched into her defense. "This is nothing more than a politically motivated attack," she declared, her tone firm but laced with irritation. "These allegations are baseless, and the so-called evidence being presented has been taken completely out of context. Someone is deliberately trying to destroy my reputation." At first, viewers might have bought into her argument. After all, political smear campaigns weren't uncommon. But as the interview went on, things started to unravel. When pressed for specifics, Jasmine struggled to provide clear answers. Instead of addressing the documents directly, she deflected, accusing Kash Patel of manipulating information and fabricating lies. Her responses grew increasingly defensive, and her body language betrayed her agitation. She shifted in her seat, avoided eye contact, and spoke in short, clipped sentences. Then came the moment that would define the entire interview. The host asked a simple question. "Can you explain these emails showing approvals for fund transfers?" For a split second, Jasmine froze. Her face flushed red and her voice rose sharply. "You think I'm going to sit here and let you slander me? You have no idea who you're dealing with," she shot back, pointing a finger at the camera as if challenging Kash Patel himself. The room fell silent. Even the host seemed taken aback by her outburst. Viewers watching at home didn't know what to make of it. Some sympathized with her frustration, understanding how stressful the situation must be. Others saw it as confirmation of guilt, a sign that she couldn't handle tough questions because she had something to hide. Within minutes, clips of her meltdown went viral. Memes flooded social media, capturing her angry expression and fiery tone. Late-night comedians pounced on the moment, turning it into fodder for jokes. Critics seized the opportunity to paint her as unstable and unfit for leadership. Supporters tried to rally behind her, arguing that anyone would react emotionally under such intense scrutiny. But the damage was done. Behind the scenes, Jasmine's team watched in horror as their worst fears unfolded. They had hoped this interview would help shift the narrative, but instead, it only made things worse. Calls poured in from nervous donors and allies asking if they should distance themselves. Reporters camped outside her office, hungry for more sound bites. It felt like the walls were closing in. That night, Jasmine retreated to her home, exhausted and overwhelmed. She replayed the interview over and over in her mind, cringing at every misstep. Why had she lost her temper? Why hadn't she stuck to the script her team had prepared? The weight of the situation pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She realized she had underestimated the power of public perception. In politics, perception often mattered more than reality, and right now the perception was devastating. As she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the wall, her phone buzzed incessantly. Messages poured in from friends, family, and colleagues. Some offered words of encouragement telling her to keep fighting. Others delivered harsh truths, suggesting she consider stepping away temporarily to regroup. One message stood out. You've got two choices. Let this break you or use it to come back stronger. Jasmine sighed deeply, running her hands through her hair. She knew this scandal wouldn't disappear overnight. If anything, it was only going to get worse before it got better. Federal investigators were reportedly looking into the allegations, which meant legal battles loomed on the horizon. Her once promising career now hung by a thread. But despite the chaos surrounding her, a spark of defiance flickered inside. She refused to go down without a fight. This wasn't just about her. It was about proving that even when the odds were stacked against you, resilience could still prevail. As much as this moment hurt, she vowed to rise above it. She'd find a way to reclaim her story, no matter what it took. What happened next would test her strength, resolve, and ability to adapt in ways she never imagined. The road ahead promised to be long and grueling, but quitting wasn't an option. Not for someone like Jasmine Crockett. The days following Jasmine's explosive interview were a whirlwind of chaos and betrayal. The cracks in her foundation began to widen, threatening to bring everything crashing down. What started as a scandal quickly turned into a full-blown crisis, not just for Jasmine but for everyone connected to her. Allies who had once stood proudly by her side now found themselves questioning their loyalty. Donors who had poured money into her campaigns grew nervous, wondering if their investments would be tainted by association. And then, one by one, they started to distance themselves. It began subtly at first. A key aide resigned, citing personal reasons, though insiders whispered it was more about self-preservation than anything else. Then another followed, and another. Each departure sent shockwaves through her inner circle, leaving Jasmine feeling increasingly isolated. These weren't just employees. They were people she trusted, people she relied on to keep her operation running smoothly. Now they were walking away, leaving her to face the storm alone. Publicly, some of her former allies issued carefully worded statements. "We support transparency and accountability in all aspects of public service," one said. Another added, "If these allegations are proven true, appropriate action must be taken." Their words cut deep. To Jasmine, they felt like betrayals, calculated, moves to protect their own reputations while throwing her under the bus. Behind closed doors she fumed, calling them cowards and backstabbers. But publicly, she maintained a facade of strength, refusing to let anyone see just how much this was affecting her. Meanwhile, Kash Patel continued to dominate the headlines. He appeared on talk shows, wrote opinion pieces, and gave interviews, each time reinforcing his stance that this wasn't personal, it was about integrity. "People deserve to know the truth," he said during one appearance. "No one is above scrutiny, especially those in positions of power." His message resonated with many viewers, particularly those disillusioned by corruption in politics. Supporters hailed him as a hero, someone brave enough to take on the establishment. Critics, however, accused him of exploiting the situation for personal gain. Either way, his profile skyrocketed, turning him into a household name almost overnight. For Jasmine, the contrast between her crumbling world and Kash's rising star was unbearable. She watched as he gained traction, his name becoming synonymous with accountability. Meanwhile, hers became a symbol of controversy. The media circus surrounding her showed no signs of slowing down. Reporters camped outside her office, shouting questions whenever she stepped outside. Late-night comedians mocked her meltdown, replaying clips of her angry outburst over and over again. Even casual conversations among friends seemed to revolve around the scandal, dissecting every detail and speculating about what might come next. Desperation set in. Jasmine knew she couldn't afford to sit back and let the narrative spiral further. Out of control. She needed to act, and fast. With only a small team of loyalists still by her side, she huddled in her office late into the night, brainstorming strategies to fight back. They pored over documents, analyzed social media trends, and rehearsed potential responses to tough questions. It was exhausting work, but Jasmine refused to give up. This wasn't just her career on the line, it was her legacy. Her counteroffensive began with a lengthy statement posted on social media. In it, she accused Kash Patel of selective editing and cherry-picking information to create a false narrative. She shared excerpts of unrelated emails and testimonials from colleagues vouching for her character. These accusations are nothing more than a smear campaign designed to discredit me and derail my mission to serve the people, she wrote. I will not be silenced. At first, the statement garnered some attention. Supporters rallied behind her, sharing her post and defending her against critics. But skepticism lingered. Many pointed out that she still hadn't addressed the core allegations head-on. Instead, she seemed to be deflecting, offering vague denials without providing concrete evidence to refute the claims. Her attempt to shift, the focus fell flat, doing little to quell the growing doubts about her credibility. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, Jasmine took a drastic step. She filed a defamation lawsuit against Kash Patel. The move caught everyone off guard. Legal experts weighed in, analyzing the merits of the case and predicting a long, messy battle ahead. Some argued that suing Kash could backfire, drawing even more attention to the scandal and prolonging the ordeal. Others saw it as a bold gamble, a way to force him to prove his claims in court, rather than through sound bites and social media posts. The lawsuit dominated the news cycle for days. Pundits debated whether it was a smart strategy or a desperate attempt to silence her accuser. Viewers tuned in to hear legal analysts break down the complexities of defamation law and speculate about potential outcomes. For Jasmine, the decision was risky but necessary. She believed that taking legal action would show the public she was serious about clearing her name. But to many observers, it only reinforced perceptions of defensiveness and evasion. As the dust settled, the toll of the scandal became undeniable. Campaign funds dwindled as donors pulled their support, leaving Jasmine struggling to keep her operations afloat. Staffers worked tirelessly to manage the fallout, but morale was low. Everyone involved felt the weight of the situation pressing down on them. For Jasmine, the loneliness was suffocating. Friends stopped calling, afraid of being dragged into the controversy. Family members offered sympathy but little practical advice. She found herself spending long hours alone, staring at walls and replaying events in her mind, searching for answers that never came. Despite the mounting challenges, Jasmine refused to admit defeat. Deep down, she believed she could turn things around. She clung to the hope that persistence and determination would eventually win the day. But as the weeks turned into months, reality began to sink in. This wasn't just a temporary setback. It was a seismic shift that would reshape her life forever. What happened next would test her resilience in ways she couldn't have imagined. Could she rebuild trust with the public? Or would this scandal define her legacy, overshadowing everything else she had accomplished? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: Jasmine Crockett was far from finished. Weeks stretched into months, and the scandal that had once dominated headlines began to fade from the spotlight. But for Jasmine Crockett, the battle was far from over. If anything, it had only grown more intense. The initial shock of Kash Patel's revelations had worn off, but the aftermath lingered like a storm cloud refusing to disperse. Every day felt like a new hurdle, each one testing her resolve in ways she never imagined. The defamation lawsuit she filed against Kash became a double-edged sword. On one hand, it signaled to the public that she wasn't backing down, that she believed strongly enough in her innocence to take legal action. On the other hand, it opened Pandora's box. Legal proceedings dragged on, with both sides presenting their cases in painstaking detail. Court documents were made public, revealing even more information about the alleged financial irregularities. What started as whispers turned into a full-blown paper trail, scrutinized by investigators, lawyers, and journalists alike. For Jasmine, the courtroom drama added another layer of stress. She attended hearings dressed impeccably, projecting confidence, despite the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Inside, though, she was exhausted. Each session felt like reliving the worst moments of her life. Opposing counsel grilled her relentlessly, picking apart her testimony and challenging every statement she made. Reporters stationed outside the courthouse snapped photos and shouted questions, turning what should have been a private legal matter into a spectacle for the world to see. Her small team of loyalists worked tirelessly behind the scenes, strategizing ways to counter Kash's claims while managing the growing pile of bad press. They crafted statements, organized rallies, and tried to rally supporters, but the effort often felt futile. Donations trickled in at a fraction of their previous rate, making it harder to keep campaigns running. Staffers juggled multiple roles, stretching themselves thin just to keep things afloat. Morale plummeted as everyone grappled with the reality that this fight might not end well. Meanwhile, Kash Patel continued to ride the wave of attention he had garnered. His appearances on TV shows became less frequent, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. "This isn't about me," he'd say, leaning forward earnestly. "It's about holding people accountable, no matter who they are or where they come from." To his supporters, he remained a crusader for truth, a man willing to stand up to power regardless of the consequences. Critics argued that he had crossed a line, using the situation to boost his own profile. Either way, his influence grew, solidifying his place as a polarizing figure in the political landscape. As the investigation unfolded, federal authorities reportedly widened their probe. Agents interviewed former staffers, reviewed bank records, and examined communications tied to Jasmine's campaign. The process was slow and methodical, leaving Jasmine in limbo. Would they find evidence confirming Kash's allegations? Or would they uncover something exonerating her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, keeping her up at night. She replayed conversations in her head, second-guessing decisions she had made years ago. Had she unknowingly crossed ethical lines? Or was she being framed? Amid the chaos, personal relationships suffered. Friends stopped reaching out, unsure of what to say or how to help. Family members offered support, but even they struggled to understand the complexity of the situation. Her mother called occasionally, reminding her to stay strong and focus on her faith. "God doesn't give you more than you can handle," she'd say gently. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this time, God or fate had given her too much. In rare, quiet moments, she allowed herself to reflect on how quickly everything had unraveled. Just months ago, she had been riding high, celebrated as a rising star in politics. Now she was fighting for survival, her reputation hanging by a thread. The contrast was jarring, almost surreal. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made along the way, the late nights, the missed holidays, the endless criticism, and wondered if it had all been worth it. For what? To end up here, battling accusations that threatened to erase everything she had built? Yet despite the despair closing in around her, Jasmine refused to let go completely. Deep down, she still believed in her mission. Politics wasn't just a career for her, it was a calling. She genuinely cared about the issues she championed, from advocating for underserved communities to pushing for transparency in government. Ironically, those same values were now being used against her. Critics accused her of hypocrisy, pointing to the very ideals she claimed to stand for as proof of her failure. It stung, but it also fueled her determination to prove them wrong. Behind closed doors, she brainstormed ways to rebuild trust. Social media posts and press releases weren't enough anymore. People wanted tangible actions, not empty promises. So she decided to take a different approach. She launched a series of town hall meetings, traveling to communities across the country to listen to constituents' concerns firsthand. At first, turnout was low. Many attendees came armed with skepticism, firing tough questions and demanding answers. But gradually, something shifted. As Jasmine engaged directly with voters, sharing her perspective and listening to theirs, cracks of empathy began to form. Some walked away unconvinced, but others softened, acknowledging that everyone deserved a chance to tell their side of the story. These interactions gave Jasmine a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she felt like she was regaining control, not through grand gestures or flashy PR moves, but through genuine human connection. She realized that winning back trust wouldn't happen overnight. It required patience, humility, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And so, she committed herself fully to the task, knowing it might be the hardest thing she ever did. Still, challenges loomed large. Rival politicians seized the opportunity to undermine her further, proposing ethics investigations and calling for resignations. Allies who had distanced themselves earlier now hesitated to re-engage, fearing backlash if the scandal resurfaced. Even some of her closest confidants admitted privately that her road to redemption would be long and arduous. But Jasmine held on to hope. She reminded herself why she entered politics in the first place: to make a difference, no matter how difficult the journey. Whether she ultimately succeeded or failed remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: she wasn't going to let this scandal define her without putting up the fight of her life. What happened next would determine not just her future, but the legacy she left behind. Could she rise above the ashes of this crisis, or would it consume her entirely? Only time would reveal the answer. Months had passed since the scandal first erupted, and while the headlines no longer dominated every news cycle, its ripple effects continued to shape Jasmine Crockett's life. The courtroom drama dragged on, with both sides presenting their arguments in excruciating detail. Evidence was dissected, witnesses were called, and legal fees piled up. For Jasmine, it felt like living under a microscope. Every decision she'd ever made scrutinized, every action questioned. But beyond the lawsuits and investigations, something deeper was happening. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about survival. The defamation lawsuit she filed against Kash Patel became a focal point of public attention. Supporters saw it as a bold move, a sign that Jasmine was willing to fight tooth and nail for her reputation. Critics, however, viewed it as an act of desperation, accusing her of trying to silence Kash rather than address the allegations directly. Legal experts weighed in, debating whether the case would hold water. Some argued that proving defamation required showing malicious intent, something Kash could plausibly deny by framing his actions as investigative journalism. Others believed Jasmine might have a shot if she could demonstrate real harm caused by his statements. As the trial progressed, new details emerged. Documents previously unseen by the public came to light, painting a more nuanced picture of what had transpired. While some evidence seemed damning, other pieces raised questions about context and timing. It was messy, complicated, and far from black and white. For Jasmine, this ambiguity offered a glimmer of hope. If nothing else, it showed that the truth wasn't as straightforward as Kash had claimed. But even as she navigated the legal battlefield, Jasmine faced another challenge: rebuilding her political career. Allies who had once stood proudly beside her now tiptoed around her, unsure of how much support to offer. Rivals seized the opportunity to undercut her influence, proposing ethics probes and demanding accountability. Her campaign coffers remained depleted, forcing her team to stretch resources thin. Staffers worked overtime, managing logistics while fielding calls from nervous donors and skeptical constituents. Morale within the group fluctuated between cautious optimism and outright exhaustion. In response, Jasmine doubled down on grassroots efforts. She traveled tirelessly, visiting towns and cities where she hadn't set foot in years. At each stop, she listened intently to voters' concerns, engaging in raw, unfiltered conversations. These weren't polished speeches or rehearsed talking points. They were honest exchanges meant to humanize her again. People appreciated her willingness to show up, even if they weren't ready to forgive and forget. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, one handshake at a time. Her town hall meetings became particularly impactful. Instead of dodging tough questions, Jasmine embraced them head-on. "Ask me anything," she'd say at the start of each session. And people did. They grilled her about the scandal, challenged her motives, and demanded clarity. Sometimes the answers satisfied them. Other times, frustration lingered. But regardless of the outcome, These interactions created space for dialogue, a chance to remind people that behind the headlines was a human being capable of growth and reflection. Kash Patel, meanwhile, continued to play a central role in the narrative. His appearances on TV grew less frequent, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. Supporters hailed him as a whistleblower, someone brave enough to expose corruption. Detractors accused him of overstepping boundaries, turning a quest for accountability into a personal vendetta. Either way, his profile soared, positioning him as a key player in national politics. For Kash, this chapter marked both triumph and controversy, a reminder that wielding power came with risks. For Jasmine, the road ahead remained uncertain. Would the lawsuit vindicate her, or would it expose further vulnerabilities? Federal investigators wrapped up their probe, issuing findings that were neither fully exonerating nor entirely condemning. The report acknowledged discrepancies in her campaign finances but stopped short of labeling them criminal. Instead, it recommended stricter oversight moving forward, a compromise that left everyone dissatisfied. Public opinion followed suit. Polls showed mixed reactions, with some voters softening toward Jasmine while others hardened in their skepticism. Critics argued that even if she hadn't broken laws, ethical lapses still warranted consequences. Supporters countered that perfection was an unrealistic standard, especially in politics. What mattered most, they said, was her ability to learn from mistakes and move forward with integrity. By year's end, Jasmine found herself at a crossroads. Legally, the defamation lawsuit sputtered to a close without a decisive verdict. Neither side declared outright victory. Politically, she retained her seat but lost significant clout. Allies advised her to lay low, focus on policy work, and avoid high-profile controversies. But Jasmine rejected that advice. Quiet resignation wasn't her style. Instead, she vowed to double down on transparency, introducing reforms aimed at preventing similar scandals in the future. Her journey taught her lessons she never expected to learn. Humility, for one. Before the scandal, she had been confident, even cocky, at times dismissing critics as irrelevant. Now, she understood the importance of listening, not just speaking. Vulnerability, too, became a cornerstone of her approach. Sharing her struggles openly, she connected with voters on a deeper level, reminding them that leaders are fallible humans, too. Looking back, Jasmine realized the scandal had changed her in ways she couldn't undo. Whether those changes were for better or worse depended on perspective. To some, she was irreparably damaged, a cautionary tale about hubris and accountability. To others, she was proof that resilience could overcome adversity. Regardless of how history judged her, she knew one thing for certain: she had survived. As she stood before supporters at a year-end rally, her voice steadier than it had been in months, Jasmine reflected on the long, grueling journey. "This hasn't been easy," she admitted. "There were days I didn't know if I could keep going, days when doubt crept in and fear took over. But here we are, still standing, still fighting." The crowd erupted in applause, not because they agreed with everything she'd done, but because they respected her refusal to give up. In a world quick to cancel and discard, perseverance mattered, and Jasmine Crockett embodied that spirit. What happened next was anyone's guess. Would she reclaim her former glory, emerging stronger than ever? Or would lingering scars prevent her from reaching new heights? Only time would tell. But one thing was undeniable: Jasmine Crockett's story wasn't over yet.